Clara Whitmore stepped off the dusty stagecoach with a small suitcase and a heart full of hope. The air in the Kansas frontier smelled of earth and horses, and the wooden buildings looked worn by wind and time. She had come so far, leaving behind a lonely boarding house in Boston, believing that somewhere out west, someone was waiting for her. The man who had written her letters, Mr. Halpern, promised a home, a future, and kindness. She had imagined their first meeting countless times. His smile, his warm handshake, maybe even a soft word of welcome. But when the coach wheels stopped and she looked up, she saw him staring at her from the edge of the crowd. Mr. Halpern was tall, with sharp eyes and a proud posture. For a moment she thought he might be nervous like her. Then his eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down, his jaw tightening. "You're smaller than I expected," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the others to hear. Clara's fingers gripped her suitcase. He turned away before she could say a word. The laughter and whispers from the townspeople filled the air behind him. "Guess she won't last a week on a ranch," someone joked. "He needs a woman who can lift a hay bale, not a doll." Clara felt her face burn. The dream she had carried across hundreds of miles shattered in seconds. The driver helped her down, pity in his eyes. "You got anywhere to go, miss?" he asked softly. She shook her head. He tipped his hat and wished her luck, then drove away, leaving her in the center of a town that suddenly felt too big for someone so small. That evening, she sat on the edge of the road beside her suitcase, the sky turning orange and purple. A few people passed by, but no one stopped. Finally, the owner of the general store, Mrs. Jenkins, noticed her and offered a small place to sleep in exchange for help cleaning the shop. Clara nodded gratefully. She slept on a cot in a storage room that smelled of flour and coffee beans, staring at the ceiling until morning. The next days were long. She scrubbed floors, stocked shelves, and swept dust that never seemed to end. People still whispered, calling her the mail-order bride who got sent back, but she ignored it. She smiled when customers came in and always greeted them kindly. When a poor family came by one afternoon and their young boy stared hungrily at the candy jars, she quietly slipped a peppermint into his hand when no one was looking. Her body was small, yes, but her will was not. Each morning she told herself that strength was not only in muscles, it was in getting up again when life knocked you down. One late afternoon, as she was sweeping the wooden porch, a man rode into town. His horse was tall and dust-covered, his shirt rolled at the sleeves. He stopped in front of the store, dismounted, and nodded politely before stepping inside. Clara noticed how quietly he moved, how his eyes didn't carry the same judgment she'd seen in others. When he came out again, he thanked Mrs. Jenkins and gave a small nod to Clara before mounting up and riding away. That was the first time Eli Carter saw her. Over the next few weeks, he came into town often for supplies. Each time he noticed Clara working hard, lifting sacks, organizing crates, sweeping after dark. Once he saw her struggling to carry a heavy box. He stepped forward to help, but before he could, she steadied herself, bit her lip, and pushed it onto the counter by herself. He smiled, slightly impressed. One evening, the sky darkened faster than usual. Clouds rolled in, heavy and dark, and thunder echoed across the plains. Most of the town hurried indoors, but Clara stayed behind with Mrs. Jenkins to cover the goods outside. Rain came in thick sheets, soaking everything. The wind howled through the empty streets. A cart broke loose and barrels began rolling away in the storm. Clara ran after them, clutching at the wooden handles, dragging them back even as her dress stuck to her legs and her hair plastered to her face. Eli was in town when it happened. He had taken shelter near the blacksmith's, but when he saw her fighting against the storm, his gut twisted. Without thinking, he ran to help her. Together they lifted crates and tied them down. She was trembling from the cold, but her eyes stayed focused. "Almost done," she shouted through the rain. Her voice was soft yet steady. When the last crate was safe, she leaned against the wall, soaked but smiling. Eli handed her his coat. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "It's my job. Mrs. Jenkins trusts me." That simple answer stuck with him. It wasn't about pride or attention. It was about doing what was right no matter how hard. When the storm passed, the street was covered in puddles that reflected the lantern light. Eli helped her back to the store, where Mrs. Jenkins thanked them both. Clara tried to return his coat, but he shook his head. "Keep it till it's dry." The next morning he rode out of town, but his thoughts stayed on her. He couldn't forget how she looked, small but unbroken, quiet but brave. Meanwhile, Clara continued her work, pretending not to notice the way people still gossiped. Some days were hard, some nights lonelier than she would admit, but she began to find small pieces of peace, like watching the sunrise over the plains or hearing the laughter of children outside. A few days later, Eli returned. He brought some supplies but stayed longer this time, talking with Mrs. Jenkins and glancing toward Clara now and then. Finally, he asked, "Does she have family here?" Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "No, none. Came for a marriage that didn't happen. Works harder than anyone I've seen, though." Eli nodded slowly. He didn't say anything more, but the thought stayed in his heart. Over the next weeks, they spoke occasionally, short words at first, polite greetings. But each time, his respect for her deepened. Once, when he found her struggling to hang laundry behind the store, he steadied the line without being asked. She smiled softly, and he realized how rare that smile was. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of red, Clara sat outside the store, tired after another long day. Eli approached, hat in hand. "You ever think of working on a ranch?" he asked. She looked at him in surprise. "I wouldn't want to be a burden," she said quietly. "You wouldn't be," he replied. "You'd be helping. My ranch could use someone like you, steady, careful." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she nodded. "I'll try." That night, as the town lamps flickered on, Clara looked toward the horizon. For the first time in months, she felt the small spark of something she thought she had lost. Hope. She didn't know what lay ahead at that ranch or what kind of man Eli truly was. But something in his eyes told her that, maybe this time, she wasn't being judged by her size. She was being seen for her heart, and that was enough for her to take the first step toward a new beginning. The next morning, Clara packed her few belongings into her small suitcase and stood outside the general store. The wind carried the soft smell of grass and rain as Eli Carter rode up on his horse. He helped her mount behind him, and together they rode out of town toward the wide open land where his ranch waited. Clara had never been outside the town before, and the sight took her breath away. Rolling fields stretched as far as her eyes could see, and the sky looked endless. When they reached the ranch, she saw a modest wooden house, a barn, and a few scattered corrals. The land was quiet, only the sound of cattle in the distance and the rustle of the wind in the grass. Eli showed her around, speaking in his calm, deep voice. "You can stay in the small room near the kitchen," he said. "You'll help with cooking and small chores. No one expects you to do more than you can." But Clara didn't want to be treated gently. The next morning, before sunrise, she was already awake, helping the cook prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She watched how everyone moved, fast, steady, and sure. She wanted to learn. Eli noticed her trying to carry heavy buckets of water and told her, "You'll hurt yourself." She smiled and said softly, "I'll be fine. I've lifted worse in Boston when the roof leaked." He laughed quietly. As the days went on, she learned quickly. She fed chickens, washed clothes, and even learned to saddle a horse, though she was afraid of them at first. One morning, she stood near a chestnut mare named Daisy, her heart beating fast. The horse snorted and shifted, and Clara froze. Eli came over and placed a hand on the reins. "Talk to her," he said gently. "Let her hear your voice. She needs to trust you." Clara spoke softly, and after a few tries, the mare calmed down. Eli watched her with quiet pride. "See, she listens when you do." Weeks turned into months. The ranch hands began to respect her. They teased her less and often helped her when she needed it. One of them, an old worker named Sam, told Eli one evening, "That little lady's got more heart than most of us, boss. Never seen her quit." Eli just nodded, but inside he agreed completely. Life on the ranch was not easy. There were days when the sun burned too hot and the dust made breathing hard. There were nights when storms rolled over the plains, shaking the windows and flooding the ground. But Clara never complained. When fences broke, she helped gather tools. When cattle scattered in the rain, she waited with lanterns at the barn doors. Slowly, she became part of the place, her laughter mixing with the sounds of the land. One night, near the end of summer, a storm came earlier than expected. The thunder cracked like gunfire and the sky turned black. Eli rushed out to check on the horses, and Clara followed him, despite his warnings to stay inside. They reached the barn just as lightning flashed across the sky. Inside, one of the mares, Daisy, was in labor. The animal was panicking, kicking the walls. The ranch hands didn't know what to do, shouting over one another. Clara didn't wait. She pushed through them and knelt beside the mare. "Calmer," she said firmly. "Light, bring the lantern closer." Her voice was steady, her hands gentle. She had seen her father deliver foals long ago back home. The memory guided her. Hours passed, rain pounding the roof until finally a small trembling foal came into the world. Clara wiped her forehead, smiling through tears. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Eli stood beside her, silent. He had never seen anyone work with such quiet courage. When the foal stood for the first time, Clara stroked its head softly. "You did it," Eli said, his voice filled with awe. She looked up, surprised. "We did it," she replied with a tired smile. After that night, something changed between them. Eli began inviting her to join him on his rounds across the land. They rode side by side, talking about small things, about the weather, the cattle, the stars. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just shared the peaceful silence of the plains. Clara felt something warm grow in her chest every time he looked at her with that gentle smile. One evening, while fixing a fence together, Eli asked, "Do you ever miss Boston?" Clara thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "but I think I found something here that I didn't have there." He glanced at her. "What's that?" She smiled softly. "A place where I belong." As autumn came, the ranch changed color. The fields turned golden and the wind carried the scent of dry hay. Clara became the heart of the ranch. She cooked for the men, kept the books, and even began teaching the neighbors' children to read in the evenings. Everyone came to respect her deeply. One afternoon, a familiar face appeared in town, Mr. Halpern, the man who once rejected her. He had lost some of his fortune and looked older, thinner. When he saw Clara at the market, he stopped in shock. "Clara Whitmore?" he said. She turned and met his eyes calmly. "Mr. Halpern," she said. He looked embarrassed. "You seem to have done well for yourself." "I'm doing honest work," she replied gently. "It's more than enough." Eli appeared beside her then, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Everything all right?" he asked. Mr. Halpern nodded quickly and walked away without another word. Clara exhaled slowly. Eli didn't ask questions. He only said, "You handled that well." That evening, as the sun set over the fields, Eli built a small fire outside the ranch house. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They sat quietly, listening to the crickets. After a long moment, Eli spoke. "You know, the first day I saw you, I thought you were fragile," he said. She smiled faintly. "Most people did." He shook his head. "I was wrong. You're the strongest person I know." Clara looked into the firelight. "Strength isn't about how much you can lift," she said softly. "It's about how much you can keep standing when life tries to break you." Eli nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. "I was going to wait longer," he said quietly, "but I can't think of a reason to. Clara, would you stay here always? As my wife?" Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Then she smiled, simple and sincere. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was small, just the ranch hands, a preacher from town, and a few neighbors. The wind was gentle that day, and the sun shone warm over the fields. Clara wore a plain white dress sewn by Mrs. Jenkins, and Eli looked proud beside her. When they exchanged vows, everyone could see the joy in their faces. Years later, people still told the story of the little woman who came to town as a rejected bride and became the heart of the Carter ranch. Travelers passing through would stop to see the place where kindness and courage had built something strong. Clara never forgot the pain of that first day when she was turned away, but she also never let it define her. She had found her place, her purpose, and her family. The ranch grew, and so did their love. When people asked Eli what made him choose her, he would smile and say, "Because she saw hope where others saw nothing. And she made this land feel alive again." And every time he said it, Clara would smile, knowing that in a world that once judged her for being too small, she had proven that true strength comes from the heart.